Welcome back to the deep dive. I think if you're like a lot of people listening right now, you're just navigating a world that feels, well, it feels incredibly saturated.
Saturated is a good word for it.
Yeah, with noise, with information overload, and, this deep, almost gnawing sense of injustice. Maybe for you, it's something small and specific, a frustrating decision at work, a betrayal, or maybe you're just feeling overwhelmed by the massive systemic problems where the proud seem to flourish and any kind of moral order feels constantly delayed.
And that feeling, that weight is so corrosive. It really is. It's the chaos of the world is bearing down on your spirit. And if you try to absorb that or fight those battles with only your own strength, you'll just be crushed. It's inevitable.
Which is why today we're going straight to a source that I think validates that exact frustration, but then provides this non-negotiable solution for finding peace, for finding security right in the middle of all that uproar.
We're going to be looking at Psalm 94.
Our whole deep dive today is focused entirely on this one. Incredibly raw, but ultimately triumphant piece of literature. Psalm 94. It's a chapter that literally starts with a cry of agony and frustration.
A real cry.
And it culminates in this declaration of just unshakable security in the face of all evil. It's like a roadmap for moving from despair to total confidence.
And our mission today really is based on the framework and the fantastic scriptural insights that were provided to us by the You Need Faith in Jesus team. We're going to dissect this psalm and really try to understand precisely why the psalmist moves from that urgent question, how long shall the wicked triumph?
That gut-wrenching question.
To the settled, completely triumphant conclusion. The Lord is my defense, and my God is the rock of my refuge. We really want to unpack the argument for why God alone is the ultimate authority over all earthly injustice and what that realization should immediately change about your daily mindset.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to begin where the psalmist begins, which is with this immediate, fervent, and, frankly, a desperate appeal for God to intervene.
It sets the entire tone.
It does. It acknowledges that the problem is just too big for any human to solve. So we're diving straight into part one, the appeal for divine justice, looking at those first 3 verses.
And verse 1, right out of the gate, establishes the central theological principle that everything else rests on.
All right, let's start right there. The King James Version presents Psalm 94, verse 1 in full. O Lord God, to whom vengeance belongeth, O God, to whom vengeance belongeth, show thyself.
The first thing that jumps out is the repetition, isn't it?
Immediately.
This isn't just a casual prayer. It's an urgent, formal appeal. It's like he's stating a theological fact, doubling down on it for emphasis, and then following it with a demand for action. Show thyself.
Show thyself. He's demanding that the invisible God make his presence and power visible right here on earth.
And the word choice is so specific. Vengeance.
Right. And when we hear that word vengeance, we often think of personal retribution, spite, this desire for cruel payback. But that is precisely what the psalmist is not asking for.
That's the crucial distinction. And the insights we're drawing from, as highlighted in the analysis, really confirm this. This isn't a call for private, flawed human revenge. It's an appeal to the, quote, highest court in the universe.
Wow.
It's an acknowledgement that only God has the moral authority, the perfect righteousness, to execute true justice, a balanced, impartial, holy response to evil. We as humans, we're just inherently biased. We're driven by passion. We are incapable of executing pure justice.
And that's where the psychological relief comes in, isn't it? We've all been there. When a betrayal happens, when someone lies about you, when you've been truly wronged, that immediate emotional impulse is to seek justice, or, even worse, to plot some kind of retribution.
And that desire consumes so much mental space and energy.
All of it.
It becomes this heavy, debilitating burden. So to internalize what the psalmist is declaring here, that vengeance belongs to God, is to consciously choose to offload that burden. When our human systems fail, when justice is delayed, the natural tendency is to get consumed by bitterness. But the psalmist tells us, you don't have the capacity, you don't have the authority, you don't have the purity to administer this. Give it to the one who does.
And this isn't just some archaic idea from the Old Testament. What's so powerful about the scriptural connections laid out in the material from the You Need Faith in Jesus team is that this principle is affirmed and applied directly to believers in the New Testament.
Absolutely. The Apostle Paul, he takes this principle from Psalm 94 and just reiterates it so clearly to the early church. He tells them, and by extension us, to just step away from that urge to settle scores.
He draws a hard line.
A very hard line. If you look at Romans chapter 12, verse 19, the KJV puts it so plainly. Dearly beloved, avenge not yourself, but rather give place unto wrath. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will recompense, saith the Lord.
I will recompense. That word is key. God promises to perfectly pay back, to settle the score. So Paul is essentially using the authority of the Old Testament to draw an eternal boundary for us.
He is. Justice is God's exclusive job, not ours. And if we try to take it on, we inevitably fail, and usually we just descend to the level of our oppressors.
So the immediate practical action step from this one verse is, well, it's intensely therapeutic.
It really is.
When you encounter injustice, instead of spiraling into bitterness or resentment or, plotting, you're commanded to hand the situation over to God in prayer.
It's an act of trust. You're trusting that he sees, he knows, and that he will act in his perfect righteousness and his perfect timing. It transforms a moment that could be an emotional collapse into an act of profound trust.
That reframing from personal retribution to prayerful surrender is really the true starting point for finding rest. But the appeal doesn't just stop with that quiet handing over. It really escalates in verses 2 and 3.
Oh, it does. It shifts from acknowledging God's role to demanding his visible action.
Yes, the tone changes. It becomes more urgent. The KJV reads, "Lift up thyself, thou judge of the earth. Render a reward to the proud. Lord, how long shall the wicked triumph?"
Lift up thyself, thou judge of the earth. That is a powerful, almost confrontational phrase.
It is. It's calling for this undeniable display of divine authority. It's not just asking God to notice, it's asking him to rise from what looks like inaction and act visibly as the judge of all the earth.
The psalmist is essentially saying, the world needs to see that you are still in charge. It's a call for a judgment that is undeniable and public. The earth needs concrete proof that there is a moral government overseeing all this chaos.
But then that request for visible judgment is followed by that agonizing, repetitive question, the one that is just universal to the human experience.
How long shall the wicked triumph?
That repetition just perfectly captures that gnawing frustration, doesn't it? It's what you feel when you're watching the arrogant prosper, seeing corrupt people succeed in their evil plans, and there's no immediate visible consequence.
It's the question we ask when we see some global atrocity just raging on, or a major scandal breaks and the perpetrator just avoids all accountability. You look at the chaos and you just cry out, how long is this temporary, illegitimate triumph going to last?
And that pain is legitimate. That's why the scriptural analysis shared by the You Need Faith in Jesus team is so helpful here. It guides us to contrast this cry on earth with a very similar plea that's recorded in heaven itself.
Yes, it directs us to Revelation chapter 6, verse 10, which describes the martyred saints. It's a stunning parallel. The KJV states, "And they cried with a loud voice, saying, How long, O Lord, holy and true, dost thou not judge and avenge our blood on them that dwell on the earth?"
I find that almost unsettling, to be honest.
It is.
Even the martyred saints, who are already safe, they're in God's presence, they are still crying out for the full, final vindication of justice.
Yeah.
It just completely validates the frustration we feel down here on earth.
Precisely. It assures us that bringing our desperate questions, our confusion, and our intense frustration directly to God is not a sign of weak faith. It's a shared, universal plea for ultimate righteousness that God himself honors. It shows that the desire for justice is divinely implanted within us.
But I do have to ask the question. If those in heaven are still waiting, what is God waiting for? I mean, if he sees everything and has all authority, why the delay?
And that is such an important question. The answer is usually found in two concepts, mercy and the fulfillment of his greater plan. God's timing is perfect because it accommodates the long arc of history.
Yeah.
It allows time for repentance.
It's people to change.
Exactly. It allows the full measure of wickedness to be revealed, and it allows for the completion of the church's mission. Our impatience is rooted in our short lifespan. God's patience is rooted in his eternal perspective.
That puts a really crucial framework around our suffering. It assures us that God understands our yearning for justice, but he operates on a timeline and according to a wisdom that just far exceeds ours.
It does.
So the practical takeaway here is vital. We're encouraged to be fully honest with God about our frustrations, bring that raw how long question to him, but hold it in tension with the certainty that one day, at the return of Jesus Christ, all these questions will be answered.
And the temporary triumph of evil will be definitively and eternally reversed.
Exactly. That certainty provides the anchor for the soul. And now the psalmist shifts his focus. He moves away from demanding God's action and onto exposing the wicked themselves. He details their arrogance and, crucially, their profound folly.
This moves us into part 2, The arrogance and folly of the wicked, covering verses 4 through 11. It's almost like a psychological profile of the oppressor. It shows that their cruelty isn't random. It's rooted in a fundamental logical error.
Okay, so in verses 4 through 7, the psalmist paints this very specific and chilling portrait. He details not just their actions, but also their self-congratulatory attitude.
Let's read that description in full, starting with verse 4. The KJV says, "How long shall they utter and speak hard things? And all the workers of iniquity boast themselves. They break in pieces thy people, O Lord, and afflict thine heritage. They slay the widow and the stranger, and murder the fatherless. Yet they say, the Lord shall not see, neither shall the God of Jacob regard it."
The description of wickedness, it starts with the mouth.
It does, doesn't it? They utter and speak hard things and boast themselves. Their cruelty isn't quiet. It's public and it's arrogant. And it reminds us of the power of words in systemic cruelty, the constant intimidation, the public degradation, the verbal abuse used to keep people marginalized.
And the cruelty specifically targets the most vulnerable. They break in pieces thy people. But that list of targets is so sharp. The widow, the stranger, which is the foreigner or sojourner, and the fatherless, the orphan.
And that detail is absolutely essential for understanding the biblical moral code. Under Old Testament law, these three groups were the very definition of the powerless in society. They had no legal advocates, no social status, no financial security.
So God himself took on that role.
He explicitly placed them under his own direct, special protection. So to oppress them wasn't just a crime against man. It was a calculated, high-handed act of aggression against God's own moral framework. It showed a specific disregard for the weak, for God's clear instructions.
So their wickedness is defined by public arrogance, systemic oppression, and this targeted cruelty against the most defenseless. But the root sin, the foundational flaw that permits all this evil, is revealed right at the end of that section.
It's their functional belief that God is either blind or he simply doesn't care. The Lord shall not see, neither shall the God of Jacob regard it.
It's what you'd call practical atheism.
That's exactly the term. They might acknowledge God's existence intellectually, but they live as if his awareness, his moral law, his authority are all utterly irrelevant to their daily choices. They act from this comfortable but fatally flawed assumption that they are unobserved.
And that psychological blind spot is what fuels their cruelty and their boasting.
It is. And the scriptural insights immediately link this mindset to the most fundamental form of foolishness in the Bible.
Right. The material provided draws a strong connection to Psalm chapter 14, verse 1. The KJV states, "The fool has said in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt. They have done abominable works. There is none that doeth good."
So whether they openly say there is no God, or they just assume God doesn't see my hidden actions, the practical effect is identical.
It's the same result.
A foundation of corrupt living and abominable works. It's a really sobering reality check that adopting the mindset that our actions are invisible to the divine is the very first step onto the path of moral compromise and eventually systemic sin.
And that's a profound warning for us today. We have to live with a constant moment-by-moment awareness that we operate before an all-seeing, holy God.
Absolutely. If we let ourselves compartmentalize our lives, thinking that our private thoughts are hidden web searches or our unsaid words are somehow screened off from him, we are already adopting the fatal flaw of the wicked described in Psalm 94.
It's a defense mechanism.
It's a defense mechanism against accountability that is utterly false.
That is heavy. But the psalmist doesn't just let that accusation sit there. He immediately pivots in verses 8 through 11, and he dismantles their flawed logic with this brilliant common sense argument.
He does. It's rooted in the physical reality of creation itself. He takes their arrogance and just turns it into an object of scorn.
It really is a spectacular section of inspired rhetoric. The psalmist confronts the wicked directly, challenging their intelligence. Let's read it. The KJV begins this challenge. "Understand, ye brutish among the people, and ye fools, when will ye be wise? He that planted the ear, shall he not hear? He that formed the eye, shall he not see? He that chastiseth the heathen, shall not he correct? He that teacheth man knowledge, shall not he know? The Lord knoweth the thoughts of man, that they are vanity."
The tone is just dripping with scorn.
Completely.
He calls them brutish among the people, which essentially means intellectually dull people who operate on pure animalistic impulse rather than reason. He asks them, when are you going to get wise?
And then comes this devastating, irrefutable argument based on the design of the human body.
It's the ultimate logical proof of God's omniscience. It's based on the principle that the cause must be greater than the effect. If God is the architect and the manufacturer of the human ear, which has this incredibly complex physiological ability to perceive sound,
How could the designer himself not be able to hear?
in an absolute perfect sense, if he formed the eye, which can process light and recognize color, it is completely illogical to believe the Creator is incapable of seeing.
It grounds a really abstract theological concept omniscience in a tangible, observable reality. The Creator must possess the very faculties he gives to his creation, but in a far superior and more complete way.
He sees everything we see, hears everything we hear, and infinitely more, because he built the system.
And the argument expands beyond just physical senses. It goes into intellect and moral authority.
It does. If God is the ultimate source of human knowledge, if he teaches man knowledge, and if he has the moral standing to judge and chastise the heathen, the nations, how could he possibly not know the intricate internal thoughts of every single human being? He's the source code of wisdom itself.
And that moves the argument into the realm of our internal hidden thoughts, which, as we all know, is where true sin and wickedness incubate. The psalmist explicitly states that the Lord knoweth the thoughts of man, that they are vanity.
Yes, and that assertion about the inherent emptiness of human self-reliance is so crucial that the Apostle Paul quotes it centuries later to dismantle human pride.
He does, which solidifies this as an eternal principle challenging human hubris. The scriptural analysis points us to 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 20, where Paul uses this very verse to address intellectual pride. He writes, "And again, the Lord knoweth the thoughts of the wise, that they are vain."
So Paul applies Psalm 94.11 directly to the intellectuals of his day, the wise. He argues that human wisdom, when it stands proudly against God's revelation or relies only on its own cleverness, is ultimately empty. It's worthless. It's transient.
It is vanity. Or in modern terms, it's just utter pointlessness.
So the practical lesson for us today is profound. We have to adopt a proper humility about our own ingenuity, our clever plans, our strategies for success. We're not supposed to rely on human cunning or think we can outmaneuver God or bypass his moral laws.
True wisdom isn't found in the complexity of our own thought.
No, it's found in the humble submission of our minds to the all-knowing Creator through his revealed word. And that is how we distinguish ourselves from the brutish and the fools.
That transition from judgment on the wicked to instruction for the righteous is exactly what the psalm does next. It brings us into part 3, where the psalmist pivots sharply. He starts declaring the blessedness that comes from living under God's faithful, even corrective rule.
He moves from condemning the external turmoil to comforting the internal life. And the path to comfort is perhaps a little counterintuitive.
Right. It begins with discipline, which is a concept that often gets misinterpreted today.
It does. Let's look at verses 12 and 13 to understand this divinely ordained blessing. The KJV states, "Blessed is the man whom thou chastenest, O Lord, and teachest him out of thy law, that thou mayest give him rest from the days of adversity until the pit be digged for the wicked."
So this defines a very specific kind of spiritual blessedness. It's not the blessing of being wealthy or comfortable. It's the unique blessing of being under the discipline or chastening of the Lord.
And we have to be so clear about what this chastening means, as the foundational insights we're using emphasize. This is not punitive judgment aimed at condemnation that was dealt with at the cross. This is loving parental correction. It's guidance and instruction aimed squarely at spiritual growth and maturity.
With God's law, his word, serving as the textbook.
Exactly. It's relational correction, not judicial sentencing.
So divine discipline has this clear, loving purpose. And the result of submitting to this corrective process is what the psalmist calls rest.
And this is a profound inner peace, a deep spiritual quietness that you can possess even while the external days of adversity are still raging all around you.
That internal rest is remarkable because it's not dependent on the trouble stopping immediately.
No, it's sustained by two certainties. First, that God loves you enough to correct you, and second, that final judgment for the wicked is guaranteed until the pit be digged. That visual phrase, the wicked falling into their own trap, assures the believer that the end of evil is a matter of when, not if.
And the New Testament fully affirms and expands on this idea of discipline as proof of divine love. It's a unifying principle across the scriptures.
It's completely integrated into the framework of a believer's life. We can look at Hebrews chapter 12, verse 6, which the KJV states as, "For whom the Lord loveth, he chasteneth, and scourgeth every son whom he receiveth."
That is an astonishing statement. It confirms that God's discipline and correction are a powerful sign of his love, and it validates our status as his children. If you're experiencing correction, you're experiencing the proof of his fatherly affection.
It completely reframes how we view difficulty and correction.
So the practical action step here is transformative. When we face trials, setbacks, or feel the gentle or sometimes severe correction of God in our lives, we're called not to retreat into self-pity, but to see it as irrefutable evidence of his loving care.
We should immediately ask, what is he teaching me? We look for the opportunity to learn from his word, to grow in our faith, and in doing so, establish a deep, unshakable peace that outward circumstances truly cannot destabilize. This is the only way to find rest while you are still walking through the valley of adversity.
That concept of unshakable security leads us perfectly into the final statement of covenant faithfulness in verses 14 and 15. We move from personal discipline to God's commitment to his entire people.
And this section is a massive anchor of collective hope. It directly contrasts the temporary triumph of the wicked with the eternal security of the righteous. The psalmist declares, "For the Lord will not cast off his people, neither will he forsake his inheritance, but judgment shall return unto righteousness, and all the upright in heart shall follow it."
That statement is just an absolute declaration of God's fidelity and covenant security. Despite the current oppression, the failure of justice systems, the pain they're facing, the psalmist speaks with total confidence that God will neither discard nor abandon them.
The terms people and inheritance speak to a special, chosen, enduring relationship that can't be broken by temporary earthly circumstances. This is a promise of divine preservation for the long haul.
It guarantees that the current reality of injustice is intrinsically temporary. It's unnatural. The psalmist looks forward to this sure future time when judgment shall return unto righteousness.
The restoration of perfect moral order. It's the day when God's standards become the only standards applied globally, and all the ethical ambiguities are finally resolved.
And the result is powerful. All the upright in heart shall follow it. So the restoration won't just be an external act of power. It'll be like a moral gravity that draws all righteous hearts into perfect alignment with God's final action.
They'll be vindicated, and their internal righteousness will find its perfect external expression in God's restored kingdom.
And this enduring faithfulness, especially the promise that God will not cast off his chosen, is echoed so strongly by the Apostle Paul in the New Testament.
It is, reinforcing its perpetual truth. The analysis directs us to Romans chapter 11, verse 2, where Paul states, "God hath not cast away his people which he foreknew."
And while Paul was addressing the specific covenant relationship with Israel, that principle of God's unshakable foreknown faithfulness, it applies equally to all who are made his through faith in Jesus Christ.
It's an immense source of security for the believer who is navigating a world that constantly seems to be shifting the ground beneath their feet.
The practical application, then, is immense. No matter how devastating your circumstances become, if you lose everything, if you feel forgotten, if the turmoil seems endless, you can stand on the absolute foundational promise that God will never forsake you.
Your ultimate salvation and your relationship with him are secure in Christ. You look forward with absolute hope to the day he makes all things right. And that's a core tenet highlighted consistently by the You Need Faith in Jesus team's teachings.
Moving into part 4, the psalm becomes intensely personal. It shifts from these broad theological statements to a profoundly vulnerable yet ultimately comforting testimony of the psalmist's moment-by-moment reliance on God's mercy.
This section is specifically about finding the strength to survive the daily emotional siege. Verses 16 through 18 begin with this challenging rhetorical question that really speaks to the loneliness one feels when seeking help against systemic evil.
Let's read it. The KJV says, "Who will rise up for me against the evildoers, or who will stand up for me against the workers of iniquity? Unless the Lord had been my help, my soul had almost dwelt in silence when I said, my foot slippeth, thy mercy, O Lord, held me up."
That rhetorical question, who will rise up for me, is just devastated because the implied answer is no one.
Right.
It reveals that painful realization that when true, gathering darkness descends and the wicked are organized, human help is either non-existent, too scared, or just utterly insufficient.
You look around at your friends, your family, your community, your government, and you find no human power equal to the task of defending you against the crushing power of organized evil.
And the psalmist shares a moment of profound personal crisis, his own strength failing. My soul had almost dwelt in silence, which means he was on the very brink of defeat, emotional collapse, or even death.
And then that vivid image, my foot slippeth. It's the feeling of losing your footing on a precarious edge, just moments from a complete and ruinous fall.
We can all relate to that slipping feeling. Maybe it's a moment when anxiety spikes and you feel physically unsteady, Or when a tragedy hits and you feel your internal resolve just crumbling, it's the recognition that you are fundamentally weak and you cannot sustain yourself.
But the intervention is immediate, it's decisive, and it's singular. Thy mercy, O Lord, held me up. It wasn't his own grit or some clever strategic plan or human assistance that saved him.
No. It was God's steadfast love and divine mercy alone that acted as a steady hand, supporting him and keeping him from falling into defeat.
And this transition from total human failure to total divine intervention leads directly to one of the most beautiful and deeply relatable verses in the entire psalm, verse 19. It speaks directly to the modern condition of anxiety.
It absolutely speaks to the anxious, ruminating mind. The KJV says, "In the multitude of my thoughts within me, thy comforts delight my soul."
The multitude of my thoughts, that perfectly encapsulates modern anxiety, doesn't it?
It really does.
It's the relentless noise, the endless rumination, the worry that floods the mind when we're facing injustice or uncertainty or opposition. It's not one thought, but a deluge, a disorganized chaos of fears.
And what's truly remarkable is that the psalmist doesn't just find relief from the thoughts. He finds delight in the antidote. God's comforts.
Delight, that's a strong word.
It indicates something far deeper than just a moment of calmness. Divine comfort brings a deep soul-level joy and peace that utterly transcends the external chaos and the internal noise. God replaces the multitude of fearful thoughts with a singular, satisfying truth about his character.
And we often seek comfort in distractions, endless scrolling, entertainment, even food. But the psalmist points us to the true source. The identity of God as the ultimate source of emotional stability is so powerfully affirmed in the New Testament.
It is. It solidifies this truth across both covenants. The scriptural analysis directs us to 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 3 and 4. The KJV states, "Blessed be God, even the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of mercies and the God of all comfort, who comforteth us in all our tribulation."
The implication is so clear. God's very nature and character are defined by comfort and mercy. He is the God of all comfort. He knows the pain of tribulation because he sent his son into tribulation, and he provides the spiritual solution.
So the practical action step here is profoundly necessary. When you feel overwhelmed, anxious, alone, when your own strength is failing and your foot is slipping, you must intentionally bring that multitude of your worries and scattered thoughts to him in prayer.
You have to trust him to fill your soul with a divine comfort that the world simply cannot manufacture.
Relying on the boundless mercy of the Lord, upheld by the "you need faith in Jesus" team teachings. That is the prescribed spiritual path from relentless anxiety to soul-delighting peace.
That brings us to the final necessary movement of Psalm 94, Part 5, where the psalmist focuses on the certainty of divine refuge and the absolute finality of God's judgment. And this section specifically addresses the most insidious and heartbreaking form of injustice, corruption that's been institutionalized by the state.
Verses 20 and 21 are a scorching, terrifying indictment of corrupt authority. The psalmist asks this profound rhetorical question. The KJV reads, "Shall the throne of iniquity have fellowship with thee, which frameth mischief by a law? They gather themselves together against the soul of the righteous and condemn the innocent blood."
The throne of iniquity. That refers to a government, a ruling body, any corrupt institutional system of authority. And the rhetorical question asks, could a holy, just God possibly be in partnership, in fellowship, in agreement with such profound evil?
The question itself demands an emphatic no.
But the specific nature of this evil is the most frightening part. They frameth mischief by a law. They don't just commit crimes haphazardly. They use the very legal, judicial, and governmental systems that were designed to uphold justice to legitimize oppression.
They codify evil. They write laws, pass precedents, and structure policies that make injustice legal. It allows them to condemn the innocent blood under the color of law.
That is the highest level of corruption, when the mechanism of justice is actively weaponized to oppress the righteous. This institutionalized evil allows them to gather themselves together against the soul of the righteous with impunity, using official decrees as their shield.
And this abuse of power, this twisting of law to protect the guilty and murder the just, is declared an abomination to God. The scriptural insights emphasize the absolute detestation God has for perverted justice by pointing directly to Proverbs chapter 17, verse 15. The KJV says, "He that justifieth the wicked, and he that condemneth the just, even they both are abomination to the Lord."
God's standard of justice is absolute and it is clear. He detests the justification of the guilty just as much as the condemnation of the innocent. And this provides a crucial practical reminder for us today.
It does. We should never be surprised when worldly systems built by fallible and often corrupt men are unjust. Our ultimate hope and trust must be exclusively in God, the righteous King, not in human governments or legal systems which are always subject to becoming a throne of iniquity.
And that enduring hope in the divine judge leads directly into the final, triumphant declaration of the psalm in verses 22 and 23. This is the bedrock conclusion that the entire argument has been building towards. This is the final word.
Let's read those final confident verses in full. The KJV declares, "But the Lord is my defense, and my God is the rock of my refuge. And he shall bring upon them their own iniquity, and shall cut them off in their own wickedness. Yea, the Lord our God shall cut them off."
The psalm doesn't end on that frustration of how long. It ends on the absolute, confident certainty of, but the Lord is.
Yes. Despite the power of the wicked, the failure of earthly systems, and the personal slippage the psalmist experienced, he declares the Lord is his personal, active defender and his unshakable, permanent rock of my refuge.
The distinction between a refuge and a rock of refuge feels important. A refuge can be a temporary shelter, but a rock is permanent. It's unmovable and foundational.
Exactly. God is not a fleeting help. He's the immovable foundation upon which we stand.
And the mechanism of final justice is just utterly compelling. God won't just judge the wicked externally. He will use their own sin as the very instrument of their destruction. He shall bring upon them their own iniquity.
Their accumulated sin becomes the inescapable snare and the trap that consumes them. It confirms that profound idea that sin is inherently self-destructive.
So the very wickedness they celebrated and boasted about, the arrogance they relied on, will ultimately be the thing that destroys them. And that repetition, yea, the Lord our God shall cut them off, it just reinforces the absolute, permanent, and eternal consequence for unrepentant sin.
The judgment is certain and it is final. And this absolute finality is directly supported by the New Testament, reinforcing the profound truth shared by the You Need Faith in Jesus team. We looked at 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, verse 9. The KJV states, "Who shall be punished with everlasting destruction from the presence of the Lord and from the glory of his power?"
That is a stark picture of eternal separation and destruction. The final verdict isn't just a political coup or a temporary reversal of fortune. It is a permanent cutting off from the source of all life and glory.
This final passage in Psalm 94 is intended to fill the believer with total awe for God's power and unshakable confidence in his justice. It provides the necessary strength to endure the present chaos, knowing our rock of refuge will definitively have the final, righteous, and eternal say over all evil.
What an incredible journey through a single chapter. Psalm 94 really provides this comprehensive four-part framework for dealing with injustice. It moves us from the emotional devastation of the problem to the settled assurance of the divine solution.
It really does.
Let's just briefly synthesize the major movements we saw today using that powerful scriptural structure. First, we had that raw, immediate appeal to the sovereign judge, where we learned that vengeance belongs to God alone and we are free to bring our honest, agonizing how long question directly to him.
Second, we conducted the exposure of human folly, where the psalmist proved the illogical absurdity of thinking God is blind or indifferent, assuring us that the all-seeing Creator knows the vanity of all human thought. And that serves as a constant warning for us to be accountable in our private lives.
Third, we uncovered the surprising blessing of divine discipline and faithfulness. We discovered that correction is proof of God's love, leading to inner rest that survives external adversity, supported by the unshakable promise that he will never forsake his people.
And finally, we found ultimate comfort in the certainty of divine refuge and final judgment. We learned that when our foot slips, God's mercy holds us up, transforming our multitude of worries into divine delight and securing us against the throne of iniquity until he uses the wicked's own sin to bring them to their absolute end.
And before we close, let's just review those practical steps one last time, because this knowledge is meant to transform your daily life. First, when you're faced with injustice, immediately choose prayer. Surrender the matter to God rather than seeking personal, flawed vengeance.
Second, be completely honest with God about the pain and frustration of injustice. He can handle the rawest questions of your heart. Don't hide your confusion from him.
Third, constantly guard your mind against the practical atheism of the wicked. Trust God's sight and awareness over human deceit, always submitting your private thoughts and plans to him.
And fourth, embrace divine discipline as tangible evidence of his love. Use trials as an immediate opportunity to learn from his word, securing that deep, abiding inner rest that no external circumstance can touch.
And finally, a provocative thought to leave you with, one that builds on the profound justice we saw in those final verses. Ponder the mechanism of justice that God reveals here, that he doesn't merely punish the wicked with an external rod, but he orchestrates a scenario where their own iniquity becomes the instrument of their eternal destruction. What does it tell us about the inherent moral design of the universe, that sin itself, unchecked and unrepented, contains the inescapable seeds of its own total collapse? It's a concept that radically shifts how we view the consequences of every choice we make.
A powerful truth to contemplate as you continue your journey through a chaotic world.
We want to close by extending our sincere thanks once again to the You Need Faith in Jesus team for providing the foundational scriptural analysis and rigorous framework that allowed for this detailed exploration of Psalm 94.
Until the next deep dive, find your refuge in the rock.
We'll talk to you soon.